The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Daniela Rousseau stepped down into the dusty street of Alta, Utah, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and a heart shattered into so many pieces she wondered if it would ever beat properly again. It was the summer of 1878, and the mining town nestled in the Wasatch Mountains had seen its share of broken souls seeking refuge in the silver-rich hills. But few arrived looking as hollowed out as the dark-haired woman who stood blinking in the bright August sunlight. She was 23 years old, though the past 6 months had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with betrayal. Back in Boston, she had been engaged to a prominent banker's son, had planned her wedding down to the last detail, had believed with her whole heart that she knew what love meant. Then she had walked into his study unannounced one afternoon and found him with her own cousin, tangled together on the leather sofa where he had once whispered promises into Daniela's ear. The humiliation had been suffocating. The whispers at parties, the pitying glances, the way her former friends suddenly found reasons to cross the street rather than speak with her. Her aunt had suggested a change of scenery, and Daniela had seized the opportunity like a drowning woman grasping at driftwood. She had a distant uncle in Alta who ran a boarding house, and he had agreed to take her in until she found her footing. The journey west had taken 3 weeks, and every mile had carried her further from the wreckage of her old life. She picked up her bag and made her way toward the boarding house, her traveling dress already coated with the fine dust that seemed to cover everything in this mountain town. The streets were busy with miners and merchants, the sound of hammering echoing from somewhere nearby where new buildings were going up. Alta was growing, thriving on the silver that came from the tunnels carved deep into the surrounding peaks. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and curtains in the windows that looked freshly washed. Her Uncle Samuel met her at the door, a bear of a man with a graying beard and kind eyes that reminded her of her late father. He wrapped her in a hug that smelled of pipe tobacco and coffee, and for the first time since she had left Boston, Daniela felt something close to safe. "You look worn through, girl," Samuel said, taking her bag. "Let me show you to your room. You can rest up, and we will talk over supper about what you might want to do here. I could use help with the boarding house if you are interested. The guests keep me running from dawn to dusk." Daniela nodded, grateful for the prospect of useful work. Anything to keep her mind from circling back to those dark thoughts that had plagued her throughout the journey. She followed her uncle upstairs to a small but clean room with a window that looked out over the mountains. The peaks rose dramatic and steep, still touched with snow even in the summer heat, and something about their permanence comforted her. She unpacked her few belongings and lay down on the narrow bed, intending to rest for only a moment. But exhaustion claimed her, and she slept through the afternoon and into the evening. When she finally woke, the light had turned golden and long shadows stretched across the floor. She washed her face in the basin on the dresser, changed into a simpler dress, and made her way downstairs to find her uncle serving supper to a table full of boarders. They were mostly miners, weathered men with calloused hands and sun-darkened faces, but there were a few others as well. A schoolteacher who introduced himself as Mr. Peterson, a surveyor named Harris, and at the far end of the table, a cowboy who looked distinctly out of place among the mining crowd. He was younger than most of the others, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bleached brown hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of creek water under a summer sky. He wore a dark shirt and a vest, and his hat sat on the chair beside him. When Daniela entered the room, he glanced up, and their eyes met for a brief moment before she looked away, suddenly self-conscious. Everyone, "This is my niece Daniela," Samuel announced. "She has come from Boston to help me run this establishment, so you had all better mind your manners." There was a general murmur of greeting, and Daniela took a seat near her uncle, acutely aware of the cowboy's gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before he returned his attention to his plate. She served herself from the platters of roasted chicken and potatoes, listening to the conversation flow around her. The men talked about the mines, about a new vein that had been discovered in the Emma mine, about the ongoing disputes between different claim holders. The cowboy remained mostly quiet, contributing little to the discussion. After supper, as the boarders dispersed to their rooms or out into the evening, Daniela helped her uncle clear the table. She was carrying a stack of plates to the kitchen when she nearly collided with the cowboy in the narrow hallway. He reached out to steady her, his hands gentle on her arms, and she caught the scent of leather and sage. "Sorry, miss," he said, his voice low and careful. "I did not mean to startle you." "It is my fault," Daniela replied, stepping back. "I was not watching where I was going." He studied her for a moment with those clear eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through to all the broken places inside her. "I am Owen Xavier," he said finally. "I have been staying here while I work on a ranch just outside town. Your uncle is a good man." "Daniela Rousseau," she replied, though he already knew her name. There was something about his presence that made her feel both nervous and oddly settled, as if he carried a calm that extended outward to the space around him. "Welcome to Alta, Miss Rousseau," Owen said, tipping his head in a gesture that was almost old-fashioned. Then he moved past her toward the front door, and she heard his boots on the porch steps as he headed out into the night. The next morning, Daniela woke early and set about learning the rhythms of the boarding house. Her uncle showed her how he liked things done, from the way the beds should be made to the schedule for meals. There were 8 regular boarders, plus occasional travelers who stayed a night or two before moving on. The work was physical and constant, but Daniela threw herself into it with determination. It felt good to have purpose, to fill her days with tasks that left no room for dwelling on the past. Owen Xavier, she learned, was not like the other boarders. He kept irregular hours, sometimes gone for days at a time, other times present for every meal. He worked at the largest ranch in the area, helping to manage the cattle that grazed in the high mountain meadows during the summer months. When he was at the boarding house, he was unfailingly polite but quiet, often sitting on the porch in the evenings with a book or simply watching the mountains as the sun set behind them. Daniela found herself noticing him more than she wanted to admit. The way he moved with an easy grace, the gentle way he spoke to her uncle, the flash of humor that occasionally lit his eyes when one of the miners told a particularly outrageous story. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was simply starved for kindness after months of cold shoulders and cruel whispers. Her heart was too damaged for anything more than observation. 2 weeks after her arrival, a late summer storm rolled through the mountains, bringing sheets of rain that turned the streets to mud and kept everyone indoors. Daniela spent the afternoon baking bread and preparing a large pot of stew for supper, grateful for the warmth of the kitchen while the rain hammered against the windows. Owen came in mid-afternoon, soaked through and tracking mud across the floor. "Sorry," he said, looking genuinely chagrined as he saw the mess he had made. "I will clean it up." "Let me get you a towel first," Daniela said, hurrying to the linen closet. She returned with a thick towel and handed it to him, watching as he dried his hair and face. His shirt clung to his shoulders and she turned away quickly, focusing on the stew pot. "Smells good," Owen said, moving to stand near the stove. "Your cooking is a sight better than what your uncle was serving before you arrived. Not that I would tell him that. Daniela smiled despite herself. He said the same thing about his own cooking. I think he is relieved to pass that duty to someone else. Owen hung the towel over a chair and went to fetch a mop from the back room. He cleaned up the mud without being asked, his movements efficient and practiced. When he finished, he glanced at Daniela, and something in his expression made her pause. "If you do not mind my saying so, you look like someone trying to outrun something," he said quietly. "I recognize the look because I have been there myself." Daniela stiffened, her hand tightening on the wooden spoon she held. "I do not know what you mean." "You do not have to tell me," Owen said, raising his hands in a peaceable gesture. "I just wanted you to know that Alta is a good place for starting over. Folks here tend to care more about who you are now than who you were before." There was such genuine kindness in his voice that Daniela felt her defenses crack just slightly. She stirred the stew, considering her words carefully. "Someone I trusted betrayed that trust," she said finally. "Coming here felt like the only way to breathe again." Owen nodded, leaning against the counter. "My father drank himself to death when I was 16, he said. My mother followed a year later from a broken heart, or so the doctor said. I spent a few years after that making every bad decision a young man could make, trying to drown out the anger and the grief. Eventually, I ended up here, and something about these mountains made me want to be better than I had been. It does not fix everything, but it helps." Daniela looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the handsome cowboy with the easy smile, but someone who understood what it meant to carry wounds. "I am sorry about your parents," she said softly. "It was a long time ago," Owen replied. "But I tell you that so you know you are not alone in having pieces to pick up. And if you ever need someone to talk to, or even just someone to sit with in silence, I am here." Before Daniela could respond, her uncle came into the kitchen, shaking water from his coat and grumbling about the weather. The moment broke, and Owen excused himself to go change into dry clothes. But something had shifted between them. A tentative bridge built across the careful distance Daniela had been maintaining. Over the following weeks, that bridge grew stronger. Owen began spending more time at the boarding house when he was not working, often helping Daniela with tasks that her uncle would have normally handled. He fixed a broken shutter on her bedroom window, repaired a sagging step on the back porch, and once spent an entire afternoon helping her move furniture so she could clean behind it. They talked while they worked, easy conversations that ranged from the trivial to the meaningful. Daniela learned that Owen had grown up in Colorado, that he loved horses more than people most days, that he dreamed of owning his own ranch someday. He learned that she had studied literature in Boston, that she missed the ocean but loved the mountains, that she had always wanted to travel but had never been further west than Philadelphia before this journey. They discovered a shared love of reading, and Owen began lending her books from his small collection, battered volumes of poetry and adventure stories that he had carried with him for years. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hint of autumn color to the aspens that dotted the mountainsides. The mining operations continued at full pace, everyone rushing to extract as much ore as possible before winter made the work more difficult. The boarding house stayed full, and Daniela found a rhythm to her days that felt almost peaceful. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of the rare days when the boarding house was quiet with most of the residents out enjoying the fine weather. When Owen found Daniela on the porch reading one of the books he had lent her. He settled into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "I was thinking," he said after a comfortable silence, "that you might like to see more of the area. The ranch where I work has some of the prettiest views in the territory." I could take you riding next Sunday if you would like." Daniela lowered the book, her heart doing an unexpected flutter. "I have not ridden in years," she admitted. "I am not sure I remember how." "I will find you a gentle horse," Owen assured her, "and I promise to go slow. But if you would rather not, I understand." She should say no. She should maintain the careful walls she had built around herself, should remember that the last time she had let someone close, it had ended in devastation. But when she looked at Owen, at the open hopefulness in his expression, she found herself wanting to say yes, wanting to take the risk, even if it terrified her. "I would like that," she said, and was rewarded with a smile that made her stomach flip. The following Sunday dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect late summer days that felt stolen from time. Daniela dressed in her most practical clothing, a split riding skirt she had borrowed from one of the neighbor women and a simple blouse. Owen arrived mid-morning with 2 horses, a large roan gelding for himself and a smaller bay mare with kind eyes for Daniela. "This is Honey," Owen said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is as sweet as her name and will take good care of you." Daniela approached the horse cautiously, extending her hand for Honey to sniff. The mare nuzzled her palm gently, and Daniela felt some of her nervousness ease. Owen helped her mount, his hand steadying her as she found her seat in the saddle. She had forgotten how high up you sat on a horse, how the animal's warmth radiated through the leather. They rode out of town at a walk, taking a trail that led up into the mountains. Owen kept his promise to go slowly, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, the air sharp with the scent of resin and earth. Birds called from the trees, and occasionally they caught glimpses of deer bounding away through the undergrowth. After an hour of steady climbing, they emerged into a high meadow that took Daniela's breath away. The grass was still green despite the advancing season, dotted with late-blooming wildflowers. The meadow stretched for acres, surrounded by towering peaks that seemed to scrape the sky. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully. "This is where we bring the herd in summer," Owen explained, dismounting and coming to help Daniela down. "The grass is rich up here, and the cattle fatten up before we drive them down for winter." Daniela stood in the meadow, turning slowly to take it all in. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I have never seen anything like this." Owen smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I thought you might like it. I come up here when I need to think or when the world feels too heavy. Something about being this high up makes everything else seem smaller." They let the horses graze while they sat in the grass, talking and watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky. Owen told her more about his work, about the challenges of managing cattle in the mountains, about the satisfaction of working with animals and land. Daniela found herself opening up in ways she had not expected, telling him about her life in Boston, about her family, and eventually, haltingly, about what had happened with her former fiancé. "His name was Richard," she said, pulling at the grass beside her. "We had known each other since we were children. When he asked me to marry him, it felt inevitable, like it was what we had been moving toward our whole lives. I thought I knew him completely." She paused, the old anger and hurt rising in her chest. "But I did not know him at all. And my cousin, Catherine, she was someone I trusted. We had grown up together, shared secrets, been closer than sisters. The betrayal from both of them felt like it broke something fundamental in me." Owen was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "Did you love him?" he asked finally. Daniela considered the question. "I thought I did," she said slowly. "But now I wonder if I loved the idea of him more than the reality. He fit into the life I was supposed to have. The right family, the right prospects, the right everything according to Boston society. I am not sure I ever really knew what love was supposed to feel like. I do not think love is supposed to hurt like that, Owen said softly. I think real love should make you feel more yourself, not less. It should build you up, not tear you down. Daniela looked at him, struck by the simple truth in his words. Have you ever been in love? She asked. Owen plucked a stem of grass and twirled it between his fingers. I thought I was once. There was a girl in Colorado before my parents died. Sarah was her name. She was pretty and fun, and I was young enough to think that was all that mattered. But when things got hard after my folks passed, she made it clear she wanted no part of my troubles. It hurt at the time, but looking back, I do not think either of us really understood what we were doing. We were just kids playing at grown-up feelings. And since then, Daniela asked, surprised by her own boldness. Since then, I have been too busy working on myself to have much time for romance, Owen admitted. I did not want to bring someone into my life until I felt like I had something real to offer. A man needs to know who he is before he can be good for anyone else. They sat in companionable silence for a while, and Daniela found herself thinking about Owen's words. She had spent the past months feeling like she was fundamentally broken, like what had happened had damaged her beyond repair. But sitting here in this beautiful place with this kind, patient man, she started to wonder if maybe she was not broken at all. Maybe she had just needed distance from the people and places that had made her feel small. The ride back down the mountain felt different than the ride up. Daniela was more relaxed in the saddle, more confident in her ability to guide the mare. Owen rode beside her, and they talked easily, the conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. By the time they reached Alta, the sun was starting to sink toward the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Thank you, Daniela said as Owen helped her dismount in front of the boarding house. That was exactly what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it. Owen smiled, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. We should do it again sometime, he said. There are plenty more places I could show you. I would like that, Daniela replied, and realized she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. As autumn deepened, Owen and Daniela fell into a pattern of spending time together whenever his work allowed. He took her on more rides into the mountains, showed her hidden valleys and crystal-clear streams, taught her to identify different plants and animal tracks. She began to look forward to these excursions with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. Her heart, which she had been so certain was too damaged to feel anything again, seemed to be mending itself in Owen's steady presence. The boarding house residents noticed, of course. Miners were terrible gossips, and soon Daniela's uncle was giving her knowing looks and asking pointed questions about when Owen might be coming by next. She tried to deflect, insisting they were just friends, but Samuel would just chuckle and shake his head. I have eyes, girl, he said one evening as they prepared supper together. And I see how that boy looks at you. More importantly, I see how you look at him. You smile now, really smile, not that polite thing you were doing when you first arrived. Daniela felt her cheeks heat. He has been kind to me, she said carefully. He has been a good friend. He has been more than a friend, and you know it, Samuel replied. There is nothing wrong with letting yourself be happy again, Daniela. What happened in Boston, that was not your fault. You deserve good things, and that Xavier boy is as good as they come. She wanted to believe him, but doubt still whispered in the back of her mind. What if she was wrong about Owen the way she had been wrong about Richard? What if she was setting herself up for another devastating fall? October brought the first real cold, frost sparkling on the ground in the mornings and ice forming in the water buckets. The aspen trees turned brilliant gold, entire hillsides glowing like they were lit from within. Owen's work at the ranch intensified as they prepared to move the cattle down from the high country before the serious snow arrived. He came to the boarding house one evening in mid-October, looking exhausted but pleased. "We brought the last of the herd down today," he told Daniela as she served him supper. "All accounted for, fat and healthy. The boss is happy." "That must be a relief," Daniela said, setting a plate of pot roast in front of him. "It is," Owen agreed, digging into the food. "And it means I will have more free time for a while. The winter work is not as demanding. I was thinking," he hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. "There is a dance next Saturday night at the community hall. Nothing fancy, just folks getting together for music and socializing. Would you want to go with me?" Daniela's heart leaped even as her mind raised alarms. A dance was different from their mountain excursions. A dance was public, a statement that they were courting. Once they crossed that line, there would be expectations, assumptions. If things went wrong, everyone would know. The humiliation she had fled in Boston could follow her here, but when she looked at Owen, at the hope and vulnerability in his expression, she found she did not want to let fear make this decision for her. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Owen's face was worth every bit of risk. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Daniela altered one of her nicer dresses, a deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and borrowed a shawl from a neighbor. Saturday evening arrived cold and clear, stars already visible in the darkening sky as Owen came to collect her. He had dressed carefully, she noticed, in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hair neatly combed back. He looked handsome in a way that made her mouth go dry, and from the way his eyes widened when he saw her, she thought he might be feeling something similar. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly rough. "You look very nice yourself," Daniela replied, taking the arm he offered. The community hall was already crowded when they arrived, warm and bright with lamplight, the sound of fiddle music spilling out into the night. It seemed like half of Alta had turned out for the dance, miners and merchants and ranchers all mingling together. Daniela felt eyes turn toward her and Owen as they entered, felt the weight of curious gazes, but Owen simply guided her to the edge of the dance floor with a steady confidence that helped settle her nerves. "I should warn you," he said, leaning close so she could hear him over the music. "I am not the best dancer, but I promise to try not to step on your feet too often." Daniela laughed, and then Owen was leading her into a simple waltz, his hand warm on her waist. He had not been lying about his dancing ability. He was competent but not particularly graceful, but what he lacked in skill he made up for in earnest effort. Daniela found herself relaxing into the rhythm, letting him guide her around the floor. They danced several dances, then took a break to get punch and cool down. Other people came over to chat, introducing themselves to Daniela and welcoming her to Alta. She met the ranch owner Owen worked for, a gruff man named Garrett who spoke highly of Owen's abilities. She met teachers and shop owners, families with young children, old-timers who had been in the mountains since before Alta was officially a town. Everyone was friendly, curious in the way small towns were, but not unkind, having a good time. Owen asked during a break in the music, handing her a cup of cool cider. "Better than I expected," Daniela admitted. "People here are very welcoming." "That is the thing about frontier towns," Owen said. "Most folks here came from somewhere else, looking for a fresh start or a new opportunity. Makes them more understanding about other people's stories." They danced again as the evening wore on, and Daniela found herself leaning into Owen more with each turn around the floor. The warmth of his body, the solid strength of his arms around her, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, All of it combined to make her feel things she had been certain she would never feel again. When the last dance was called, a slow, romantic number that had couples pulling closer together, Owen's arms tightened around her, and Daniela rested her head against his shoulder without thinking. They swayed together to the music, and she felt something inside her chest crack open, some final wall she had been clutching crumbling away. "Daniela," Owen said softly, his breath stirring her hair. "I need to tell you something." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," Owen said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is probably too soon, and I know you have been hurt. I do not want to push you into anything you are not ready for, but I cannot keep pretending what I feel is just friendship. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. When I am out working, I find myself hurrying through tasks so I can get back to town to see you. I look for excuses to be near you. And if you need more time or if you just want to stay friends, I will respect that. But I had to tell you the truth." Daniela stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to pull back before she got hurt again. But a deeper voice, one that came from the part of her heart that had been slowly healing over the past months, whispered something different. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am terrified of being wrong again, of trusting someone and having them destroy me. But Owen, when I am with you, I do not feel broken anymore. You make me feel like myself again, like the person I was before everything fell apart. And I think I might be falling in love with you too." Owen's eyes went bright and he pulled her closer, his forehead touching hers. "Let me mend what they broke," he said intensely. "Let me show you what love should really feel like. I promise I will spend every day earning your trust, proving that I am not like him. You are not wrong about me, Daniela. I swear it." She kissed him then, right there on the dance floor with half of Alta watching. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Owen kissed her back carefully, like she was something precious, and Daniela felt the last pieces of her broken heart slot back into place. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying, tears streaming down her face, but these were good tears, healing tears. Owen wiped them away gently with his thumbs, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a tremulous hope in his voice. "That is a yes," Daniela confirmed and kissed him again to prove it. The winter that followed was one of the happiest times of Daniela's life. Owen courted her properly, with all the seriousness and dedication he brought to everything he did. He took her on sleigh rides through the snow-covered mountains, brought her small gifts he carved with his own hands, sat with her by the fire in the boarding house reading aloud from books they both loved. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's quirks and habits, building a foundation of friendship beneath the growing love. The boarding house residents were universally delighted by the romance unfolding in their midst. The miners treated it like their personal entertainment, teasing Owen mercilessly whenever he appeared at the boarding house with some small gift for Daniela. Her uncle Samuel watched it all with satisfaction, clearly pleased that his niece had found happiness in Alta. Christmas came, and Owen gave Daniela a carved wooden box he had made himself, inlaid with different types of wood in an intricate pattern. Inside was a letter, carefully written, detailing all the things he loved about her and all the dreams he had for their future together. Daniela cried when she read it, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in every word. She gave him a warm coat she had sewn herself, lined with wool she had traded for at the general store. It was the first time she had attempted such a project, and the stitching was not perfect, but Owen wore it like it was made of gold. As the new year of 1879 arrived, Alta was buried under heavy snow, the mountains transformed into a pristine white wilderness. The mining slowed but did not stop, and the town settled into the quiet rhythm of winter. Owen spent more time at the boarding house, helping Samuel with repairs and maintenance while Daniela managed the cooking and cleaning. It was during this time that they truly became a team, working side by side, anticipating each other's needs, moving through the days with an ease that felt like they had been together for years instead of months. Samuel joked that they were already acting like an old married couple, and Owen and Daniela would exchange glances that said maybe that was not such a bad thing. February brought a fierce blizzard that shut down the town for 3 days, snow piling so high against the buildings that people had to dig tunnels to their front doors. The boarding house was snowed in with all its residents, and they made the best of it with games and storytelling and communal meals. On the second night, trapped inside while the wind howled outside, Owen pulled Daniela into a quiet corner and kissed her until she was breathless. "Marry me," he said when they finally broke apart. "I know we have not been courting for long by some standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you here in these mountains. Marry me, Daniela." She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, and then she was kissing him again, laughing and crying at the same time. They married in April, when the snow was melting and the first wildflowers were beginning to push through the damp earth. The ceremony was held in the community hall, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Daniela wore a dress of ivory silk that the other women in town had helped her sew, and Owen wore a new suit that made him look dashingly handsome. Her uncle Samuel walked her down the makeshift aisle, his eyes suspiciously bright, and when Owen took her hand, his grip was warm and steady. The preacher, a traveling minister who made the rounds through the mountain towns, performed the ceremony with simple dignity. When Owen slipped the gold ring onto Daniela's finger, a ring he had saved for months to buy, she felt a completeness she had never known was possible. This was what love was supposed to feel like. This certainty, this joy, this sense of coming home. They kissed to cheers and applause, and then there was food and dancing and celebration that lasted well into the night. Daniela danced with her new husband, with her uncle, with the miners from the boarding house who had become like family. She accepted congratulations and well wishes, and through it all, she kept glancing at Owen, hardly able to believe this was real. They spent their wedding night in a small cabin Owen had rented at the edge of town, a place that gave them privacy while still being close enough to walk back to the boarding house in the morning. Owen carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then they were alone together for the first time as husband and wife. "Are you happy?" Owen asked, cupping her face in his hands. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Daniela replied honestly. "You kept your promise, Owen. You mended what they broke. You showed me what real love feels like. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that love," Owen said, and then he kissed her with a passion and tenderness that made her feel cherished beyond measure. They made love slowly that night, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words, building intimacy with the same care they had built their friendship. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Daniela felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Owen replied, pulling her closer. "Always." The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. They continued living at the boarding house, occupying a larger room that Samuel had prepared for them. Daniela ran the household while Owen worked at the ranch, and they saved every penny they could, planning for the future. Owen's dream of owning his own ranch seemed impossibly distant, but they chipped away at it bit by bit. By the end of that first year, they had saved enough to buy a small piece of land just outside Alta, a few acres with a stream running through it and good grass for grazing. It was not much, but it was theirs, and they began building on it whenever Owen had free time. With help from friends and neighbors, they constructed a small cabin over the course of that second summer. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it had solid walls and a good roof, and when they moved in that September, Daniela felt like a queen in a palace. They bought their first cattle that fall, just 10 head to start, funded by a loan from Samuel and careful saving. Owen built a small barn and corrals, working late into the nights by lantern light. Daniela helped however she could, and they fell into bed each night exhausted but content, their dreams slowly taking shape around them. In the spring of 1881, Daniela realized she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, and he swept her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled the cattle in the nearby pasture. They laughed together, and Owen placed his hand on her still flat belly with a look of wonder. "A baby," he said, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "You are going to be such a good father," Daniela said, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Daniela tired more quickly and had to give up some of the heavier work around the ranch. Owen was attentive and protective, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. Their neighbors and friends rallied around them, the women offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, the men helping Owen with projects that needed to be finished before the baby arrived. Samuel was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of being a great uncle, already planning improvements to the boarding house to make it more suitable for visits from a small child. Daniela, watching her uncle fuss over the baby cradle he was building, felt a deep gratitude for the family she had found here in the mountains. Their son was born in November, during an early snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Daniela was frightened, but the midwife was experienced and calm, and Owen held her hand through the worst of it, murmuring encouragement and love. When the baby finally arrived, letting out a healthy wail, Daniela cried with relief and joy. "A boy," the midwife announced, cleaning the infant and wrapping him in a soft blanket. "Strong lungs on this one." Owen held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, looking at the tiny scrunched face with absolute adoration. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Daniela, he is perfect." They named him Thomas, after Owen's father, and watching her husband with their baby, Daniela felt her heart expand with a love she had not known was possible. This was her family, this man who had promised to mend her broken heart, and this child they had created together. This was what she had traveled across the country to find, though she had not known it at the time. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranching was hard work, subject to the whims of weather and markets and 1,000 other variables beyond their control. There were years when money was tight, when they had to make difficult decisions about which bills to pay first. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, droughts that made the grass sparse, illnesses that swept through the herd, but there were far more good times than bad. Their ranch grew slowly but steadily, their herd increasing year by year. Owen's reputation as a skilled cattleman spread, and he was able to take on extra work consulting for other ranchers. Daniela proved to have a talent for managing the finances, keeping careful records and making smart decisions about investments. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals. He could ride almost before he could walk, fearless on the gentlest horses. Watching him race across the pastures on his pony, Daniela would remember that first terrible summer when she had arrived in Alta broken and hurting, hardly able to imagine ever being happy again. The contrast with her life now was so stark, it sometimes took her breath away. In 1884, they had a second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Daniela's dark hair and Owen's clear eyes, and her father was instantly besotted. If Thomas was their wild child, always off on some adventure, Rose was their cuddle bug, happy to sit in her mother's lap for hours. The cabin grew too small for their expanding family, and they built an addition, then another. The ranch flourished, and they were able to hire help, taking on young men who wanted to learn the cattle business. They became pillars of the Alta community, hosting neighbors for dinners and helping out when others faced troubles. Samuel grew older but remained active in the boarding house, though he eventually took on a partner to help with the physical labor. He was a constant presence in his great-niece and great-nephew's lives, spoiling them shamelessly and telling them stories about their parents' courtship that made Thomas and Rose giggle and made Daniela blush. In 1887, they welcomed another son, naming him James. He was a quiet baby, thoughtful even as an infant, and he brought a different energy to the family. With 3 children and a thriving ranch, life was busier than ever, but it was a good busy, a full busy. Owen and Daniela would sometimes sit on their porch in the evenings after the children were in bed, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed their love story, and marvel at how far they had come. Owen would take Daniela's hand, calloused now from years of work, and bring it to his lips. "Do you ever regret it?" he would ask, though he knew the answer. "Leaving Boston, coming here?" "Never," Daniela would reply firmly. "Everything I went through, everything that hurt, it led me here to you. I would go through it all again if this is where I ended up." The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a young man who wanted to expand the ranch, to push into new territory. Rose developed a love of reading and teaching, spending hours with the younger children in town. James turned out to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal. In 1892, Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. The loss hit Daniela hard, this man who had taken her in when she was broken and given her a place to heal. But she took comfort in knowing he had died happy, surrounded by family who loved him, his life full and complete. They laid him to rest in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Alta, and Daniela stood between Owen and her children, grateful for the legacy Samuel had left. Without him taking her in that summer day 15 years ago, none of this would have existed. Her life, her love, her family, all of it had grown from the kindness of one man who had seen a lost young woman and offered her shelter. Thomas married in 1894, bringing home a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch. Within a year, they had made Daniela and Owen grandparents, a grandson named Samuel in honor of Daniela's uncle. Holding that baby, Daniela thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the long road from heartbreak to healing to this profound joy. Rose went to Denver to attend teachers' college, coming home with stories of the city and ideas for improving the school in Alta. She eventually took over as the head teacher, shaping young minds with the same passion her mother had once brought to her studies in Boston. James, quiet James, surprised everyone by falling in love with the daughter of a Ute family that traded in Alta. It caused some talk in town, but Owen and Daniela supported their son's choice, welcoming the young woman into their family. The wedding was a beautiful blend of traditions, and the young couple made their home on a section of the ranch that Owen deeded to them. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, now a true family enterprise with Thomas managing the cattle operations and James handling the horses. Rose taught during the school year and helped with the ranch in the summers. The grandchildren multiplied, filling the house with noise and laughter and life. Owen's hair turned silver, and Daniela's developed threads of white, but they were both still strong and active, still working side by side like they had from the beginning. They had built something lasting here in these mountains, something that would endure beyond them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen took Daniela back to the high meadow where he had first brought her all those years ago. It was summer again, the grass green and the wildflowers blooming, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. They sat in the same spot where they had talked about heartbreak and healing, where Daniela had first started to believe she might be whole again. "I have never stopped being grateful," Owen said, taking her hand. "For that day when you stepped off the stagecoach, for every day since. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Daniela." "You gave me my life back," Daniela replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I came here broken, barely able to breathe from the pain. And you showed me that what I thought was love before was just a pale shadow of the real thing. You taught me what it means to be truly loved, truly cherished." "We taught each other," Owen corrected gently. "You made me want to be the best version of myself. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. Everything good in my life comes from you." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, comfortable in the silence, needing no words to communicate the depth of their feeling. This meadow had witnessed the beginning of their healing, and now it witnessed their continued joy. The years continued their march. Alta changed and grew, the mining playing out eventually but new industries replacing it. The railroad came through, connecting the town to the wider world. Modern conveniences arrived, telephones and electricity, transforming daily life. Through it all, the Xavier Ranch remained a constant, adapting to changes but maintaining its core identity. Owen and Daniela eventually stepped back from the daily operations, letting their children take over, but they remained active and involved, their wisdom sought and respected. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th. The grandchildren grew up and started families of their own, bringing great-grandchildren to the ranch. The original small cabin where Daniela and Owen had started their married life was preserved as a kind of shrine, a reminder of humble beginnings and dreams realized through hard work and love. In 1909, when Daniela was 54 and Owen 58, they sat on the porch of their expanded home on a summer evening, watching their descendants play in the yard. 3 generations of Xaviers, all of them part of the legacy that had started with a broken-hearted woman and a cowboy who had promised to mend what was broken. "Did I keep my promise?" Owen asked, echoing a conversation they had had decades ago. Daniela looked at him, at the face she had loved for over 30 years, still handsome despite the lines and the silver hair. She thought about the girl she had been, so hurt and lost, and the woman she had become, strong and loved and whole. "You kept every promise you ever made to me," she said. "And I would do it all again, every moment, just to end up right here with you." Owen smiled, that same warm smile that had first made her heart skip all those years ago and pulled her close. They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch they had built, the family they had created, the love that had endured and deepened with every passing year. The Wild West that had been so wild when Daniela first arrived had gentled over time, becoming more settled and civilized. But some things remained the same. The mountains still stood eternal and unchanging. The stars still blazed brilliant in the high-altitude darkness. and the love between a cowboy and the woman who had come to the frontier with a broken heart, a love that had mended and healed and grown into something unshakable, remained as strong as it had been on that spring day when they had promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. As they grew older still, slowing down but never stopping, they took comfort in knowing that what they had built would continue long after they were gone. The ranch would pass to their children and grandchildren. The family would grow and change, but at the heart of it all would be the love story that had started it all. On quiet evenings, they would tell stories to the youngest great-grandchildren, tales of the old days when Alta was young and wild, when mining was king and the mountains still held secrets. And sometimes, Daniela would tell them about the day she arrived in Alta, heartbroken and lost, and how a kind cowboy had promised to mend what was broken. And did he? The children would ask, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. He did, Daniela would say, glancing at Owen with eyes still full of love. He showed me what real love was supposed to be. He gave me everything I never knew I needed. He gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. He gave me himself, completely and honestly, and that made all the difference. The children would nod solemnly, understanding in the way children do that this was an important story, a foundational truth of their family. They were the legacy of that love, the proof that healing was possible, that broken hearts could mend and love could triumph. Owen and Daniela lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone celebrated with a huge party that brought family and friends from across the state. They stood together, older and slower but still deeply in love, and renewed their vows in front of everyone who mattered. When Owen looked at Daniela and promised again to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, there were not many dry eyes in the crowd. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he told her, and meant it with his whole heart. "And you are still the man who saved my life," Daniela replied. "Not by grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but by simply being kind when I needed kindness, patient when I needed patience, and loving when I needed love. You are my hero, Owen Xavier, and you always will be." They danced that night, moving slowly across the floor in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch, the family, the love, all of it was real and solid and enduring. What had started with a broken heart arriving in a frontier town had become a legacy that would last for generations. When Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1915 at the age of 64, with Daniela holding his hand, she grieved deeply, but without regrets. They had been married for 36 years, and not one of those years had been wasted. He had kept every promise, loved her with everything he had, and given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved and the family he had cherished. And though she missed him with an ache that never fully faded, she took comfort in knowing that she had been truly loved, that she had loved truly in return, and that their love had created something beautiful that would outlast them both. Daniela lived another 12 years after Owen's death, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She watched her grandchildren marry and her great-grandchildren grow, the family tree spreading wider with each passing year. She told stories about Owen, keeping his memory alive, making sure that future generations understood what kind of man he had been. When she finally passed away in 1927 at the age of 72, surrounded by family in the home she and Owen had built together, her last words were about him. "I see him," she whispered, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. "He is waiting for me, my cowboy, my love." They buried her beside Owen on the hill, their graves side by side, overlooking the ranch and the mountains that had witnessed their love story. The headstones were simple but meaningful, marking the resting place of two people who had found each other in the Wild West, who had healed each other's wounds, and who had built something lasting from broken pieces. Years later, decades later, even generations later, the story was still told in Alta. The story of the woman who came from the East with a broken heart, and the cowboy who promised to mend what others had broken. It became a legend of sorts, a reminder that love could be found in unexpected places, that healing was possible, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we never knew we needed. The Xavier Ranch still stood, still operated by descendants of that original love story. And on certain summer evenings, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the grass, people said you could almost see them there. A man and a woman sitting in the meadow, hands clasped, looking at the mountains that had brought them together and kept them together for a lifetime. Daniela had come to the frontier with a broken heart, not knowing if she would ever feel whole again. But Owen had kept his promise. He had mended what they broke. He had shown her what love really meant. And together, they had built something that would last forever. A love story written in the very mountains themselves, enduring and eternal and true. The Wild West had tamed itself over the years, but the love between a cowboy and the woman he had saved, that remained as wild and beautiful and powerful as it had been from the very first moment. Their eyes met across a boarding house dining room on a summer day in 1878.